Welcome to this SSRS Report Builder tutorial. In this video we'll look at how to assign default values to parameters. We'll start with a quick reminder of creating query parameters and then show you how to assign a specific default value by typing that value in. We'll also look at how to calculate the min and max possible value for a data type and also how to calculate the min and max values that have actually been entered into a field. In the final part of the video, we'll look at how to calculate default values for dates, including how to set a default value based on today's date. So let's get started. Just as a quick demonstration of what we'd like to achieve in this video, ordinarily when you run a report which contains parameters, you have to fill in a value for every parameter before your report displays its results. That can get quite tedious when you have lots of parameters to fill in. So our aim is to create a report which fills in its parameter values automatically when you run it. So you can see that all the parameters have been filled in and the report immediately displays some results. If you want to follow along with the video, a quick reminder that you'll need a copy of the SSRS Movies database, and if you don't already have it set up, this video will show you how to get that done, and you'll find a link in that video's description to download the required files. Assuming you have done that already, I've got a brand new blank report waiting for me in Report Builder, and the first thing I'll do in here is create a data source to connect to that database. So I can right click my data sources folder and choose Add Data Source. I'll call this one Movies, as I usually do. I'll use an embedded connection pointing to a Microsoft SQL server, and then click the Build button to get some help constructing the connection string. I'll type in /SQL 2017, so a shortcut to my local host, and then the name of the instance of SQL Server I'm connecting to. And then from my drop-down list, I can select my Movies database. Having done that, I can click OK, and OK again, and there's my data source created. From that, I can create a basic data set, so I'm going to right-click on my Movies data source and choose Add Data Set. And I'll call this one Films, and then I can click the Query Designer to quickly pick a few columns from a table. So from the Tables folder, I'll expand the Film table, and then I'll select the title, the release date, and the runtime minutes fields. And that'll do just for the simple demonstration we're about to create. So I'll click OK a couple of times, and then that's my data source and data set created. Next, I can create a basic table to display the results of that dataset. I'll start by tidying up the report, so I'll get rid of my page footer and get rid of this placeholder title text box. And then I can right-click into the body of the report and choose to insert a table. I'll assign the three fields I've selected, title, release date, and runtime minutes. And then just to avoid this font rendering bug, which you may well have encountered and remember from previous videos in the series, I'm just going to select all the cells in the table and then just switch from the default font to a different one and then back to the default. Then I'll just apply a bit of basic formatting to tidy up the date format for the release date cell. A basic background colour for the column headers to make those stand out. And then we can run the report just to check that we get some sensible looking results. Next, I'd like to create a parameter which allows the user to type in a film name and for the results of the report to be filtered accordingly. Let's head back to the design view. If you've watched the previous two videos in the series, you'll know there's two different approaches we can take to creating a parameter which will filter the report's results. We could create a report parameter first and then assign a filter to our dataset, or we can add a query parameter by modifying the query text, which will create the report parameter automatically. I'm going to take the latter approach. I'm going to right-click on my films dataset and choose Dataset Properties. And then in the query box at the bottom, after I've selected from the film table, I'm going to add in a where clause to ask where the film title is like the value of a parameter. So just to avoid mistyping things, I'm going to copy and paste the reference to the film title column. And then I'm going to use the like operator. I'd like my user to be able to enter wildcards in their search string. So I'm going to use the like operator to make sure that that will work. And then I can simply make up a parameter name by starting with an @ symbol, followed by the name I want to assign to my parameter. I'm going to call mine @titleText. So the end result there will be film.title like @titleText. Having done that, I can click OK, And having added the query parameter, we'll see Report Builder will automatically generate a report parameter which corresponds to that. So you can see that in the parameters folder and also in the parameters panel at the top if you have that displayed. If you don't have the parameters panel displayed, you can right-click off the body of the report and choose to display parameters. Just to quickly check that that works, if I run the report, all I should need to do at this stage is type in a search string. So I could type in an exact film name. Let's go for King Kong, for example. I get my 3 examples of King Kong. Or I could include wildcard search strings in there as well. So I could say King followed by a percentage symbol and run the report again to get all the films beginning with the word King. Ideally, when I first run the report, I'd like to see all of my films displayed regardless of what their title is. A simple way to get that to work with the way our parameter is configured is to enter a percentage wildcard symbol for the parameter's value, and when you click View Report, it will display all of the films. So it's essentially matching any film whose title is like any string of text. I'd like that percentage symbol to be filled in automatically when I run the report. So to make that work, we can head back to the design view, and then we can edit the report parameter properties. I can do this either by double-clicking the title text parameter in the parameters panel or also in the parameters folder. On the dialog box which appears, while I'm here, I'm going to take the quick opportunity to modify the prompt of my parameter just to give the user a clue that they can use a percentage symbol as a wildcard. So I'll just add that little bit of extra text. And then I can head over to the default values page. I'm going to choose to specify a value. I can choose to add one, and then I can simply type into the text box which value I would like to be automatically entered when the report runs. It genuinely is that simple. Once I've done that, I can click OK, and then the next time I run the report, I'll find that the percentage symbol has been typed in for me automatically, so I don't have to do anything. Next, I'd like to create 2 more parameters which allow the user to type in a minimum and a maximum runtime in minutes. Let's head back to the design view, and I'm going to edit my films dataset again, so I can right-click on Films and choose Dataset Properties. In the Where clause, I can add an AND operator to combine an extra criterion, and on the next line, I'm going to refer to the film runtime minutes field. So again, I'm going to copy and paste that from the select list to avoid accidentally mistyping it. So I want to check if the runtime minutes is between 2 new parameters. So I'm going to say at min runtime and at max runtime. So just to zoom in so you can see what I've done there. So that will generate 2 new report parameters, which will correspond with to the query parameters we've just written. When I click OK, we can see those parameters have been added. I'm just going to rearrange them in the parameters grid here at the top. I'm going to drag min runtime to sit just below title text, and then max runtime to sit just to the right of min runtime. Just again to demonstrate that those parameters work already without any changes. If I run the report, I've got my percentage symbol filled in already, and I can enter, let's go for 180 for the minimum runtime, and let's say 200 for the maximum runtime. Click View Report, and the list will be filtered accordingly. Now I'd like to add a default value to each of the 2 new parameters we've created. I'll head back to the design view and start by double-clicking on the min runtime parameter. On the general page, I'm just going to change the data type from text to integer or whole number. As you've seen, it's not necessary to do this with a query parameter. Everything you enter is essentially passed back as text, but I think it makes sense to match the data type of the report parameter to the data type of the column we're using it with. Once I've done that, I can head back to the default values page and choose Specify Values. And if I add a value, I suppose the most sensible value to enter for a minimum possible runtime would be 0. So I'll enter the value of 0 there and then click OK. For the max runtime, I can do the same thing. I can double click, set the data type to integer, head to default values, specify a value, click add, and then type in the maximum value I'd like to use. This is a little less easy to decide. How big a number should I enter here to allow the full range of movies that I might see in my database? I suppose you could pick an arbitrarily large number, so I can't think of many films that are 999 minutes or longer, although sometimes films do feel that long. But if I enter 999, that should cover all the possibilities for the data in this particular database. If I click OK and then run the report, we'll see those two values get filled in automatically and we return all of the films. What if we wanted to guarantee that the default value of the maximum runtime parameter covered all of the possible numbers that might be entered into the runtime minutes column? One approach we could take to this is assign a default value which matches the maximum possible value that could be entered into the data type of that column. In SQL Server, the runtime minutes column has a data type of small int, and it so happens that the maximum value of small int is 32,767. So we could assign a default value by typing in that number. But there's an easier way. We can actually calculate the maximum value of a data type by using an expression in Report Builder. The problem is that Report Builder doesn't use the same data types as SQL Server. Report Builder uses the Visual Basic.NET data types. So you might find it useful if you know your SQL Server data types to have a quick check of this SQL Server data type mappings document on the Microsoft website. And you'll see if I scroll down the list or the table, I've got the SQL Server data types on the left-hand side and then the .NET data types on the just next door to that. So if I scroll down to find small int, I'll find that the data type that matches that in .NET is called int16, a 16-bit signed integer. So now that I know that, I can head back to Report Builder. I can go back to the design view. I can double click my max runtime parameter, head back to default values, and then hit the FX button next to the value I've typed in to launch the expression builder. I'll take away the number 999 and then type in equals int16.max value. So just to zoom in so you can see that a little more clearly. Once you've done that, you can hit OK, and then OK again. And the next time I run the report, the value of this max runtime parameter is set automatically to the maximum of its data type. We could do the same thing to calculate the minimum possible value of the data type for the default value of the min runtime parameter. I'm not sure it's a sensible idea for the data we have. It's highly unlikely we'll encounter a film with a negative runtime, although I suppose there may be some data input errors. Just to demonstrate how it's done, I'm going to go back to the design view, double click my min runtime parameter, head to default values, and then click the FX button at the right hand side of the value I entered earlier. I can then change the value 0 to say equals int16.min value. And then once I've done that, I can click OK a couple of times and we'll see the value minus 32,768 as our default value for that parameter. So this approach works, and we know that the range of values entered into the parameters covers every possible number that could appear in the runtime minutes column. But it is a little excessive, isn't it? It's a far wider range of numbers than we really need. What might make more sense and would probably look a little more presentable to the end user is to calculate the minimum and maximum value that's actually found in the runtime minutes column. If you've watched earlier videos in this series, you'll be familiar with the aggregate functions and you'll know about the min and the max function. So we could use the min and max to calculate the smallest and biggest number found in a particular field. However, using them for the default value of a parameter isn't quite as simple as you might expect. Let's try to calculate the maximum value of the runtime minutes field for the default value of that parameter. Back in the design view, I can double click the max runtime parameter, head to the default value page, and then click the FX button to the right hand side of the existing expression. I'll get rid of everything except for the equals operator, and then what I'd ordinarily do is head to the common functions category and head to the aggregate category, and then double click to insert the max function. Once I've done that, I then choose from the fields list the field I want to calculate the maximum value of. But as you can see here, there's no option in the fields list to select anything. That's because this report parameter is a sort of an independent thing. It's not linked to this data set. It has no idea what columns are available in that data set in the fields list. What I can do instead is head to the Datasets category, find my films dataset in the middle, and then find any reference to the field I'm interested in. So I can see there's a sum of runtime minutes. If I double click sum of runtime minutes, it enters the function, a reference to the field, and then after the comma in some double quotes, the name of the dataset it's looking in. So this is a scope parameter, and again, you may remember that from earlier videos. All I would need to do then is change the sum to the max function, and then if I click OK and click OK again, although everything appears to have worked up to this point, when I click the Run button to see the results of the report, I unfortunately end up with an error. And the reason for the error, if I click the Details button, is that when you calculate default values for parameters, you can't use a reference to a field, unfortunately. So, expressions cannot reference fields for default values of parameters. We need a different approach. I'm going to click OK and then just head back to the design view. If we want to calculate the maximum value of a field, we need to create a separate data set in which to store that value. So to do that, I can right-click the movie's data source and choose Add Dataset. And then I'll call this dataset min-max values. We will add the minimum ones there shortly, but I'll focus on the max for now. I can head to the Query Designer, and then from the Tables folder, I can pick from the film table the runtime minutes field. What I then want to do is enable the Group and Aggregate section, so I'm going to click on that button first. The default option there to aggregate the runtime minutes field is to group by it, but that's not what I want to do, of course. If I click on where it says Group By, I can then select the max function. That will generate an alias for that field as max runtime minutes, which seems appropriate. So if I click OK and then click OK again, that entire dataset just calculates one single value. But now that I have that in a separate dataset, I can head to the max runtime parameter again. I can go to default values, and rather than trying to specify a value, I can tell it to get its value from a query. I can then choose the dataset that holds that value. That's the min-max values dataset. And then there's only one value field available in there, of course, max runtime minutes. So once I've done that, I can click OK. And then when I run the report again, the default value of that parameter is set to the maximum value that's found in that column. We can then take the same approach to calculate the minimum value found in the runtime minutes column using that same dataset. So let's head back to the design view. I don't know of a way to do this using the Query Designer. If I try to right-click on the min-max values dataset and choose Query, I don't know of another way to add the runtime minutes field to the selected fields list again so that I can add the min function to it. As it's already there, it's already checked once, and I can't check the box again, and I can't click and drag the runtime minutes field. If anybody does know of a way to do that, please let me know in the comments. So what I'm going to do instead is cancel out of this dialog box, and then I'm going to right-click on the dataset and choose Dataset Properties. I can happily just copy and paste this max expression, and then on the next line of the query I can add a comma and then paste in what I've just copied, and then I can simply alter the function that I'm using to the min function, and I'll also change the column alias as well, so it says as min runtime minutes. So the end result looks like that. Having done it, I can then click OK. And once that's worked, I can double click on the min runtime parameter. I can head to the default values page, choose to get values from a query, min max values, and then min runtime minutes. Click OK, run the report again, and now we've got the minimum value found in that table. Let's move on to date parameters next. I'd like to create a start date and an end date parameter so that we can see films released between any dates that the user specifies. Let's head back to the design view, and then we can right click on the films dataset and choose Dataset Properties. I'm going to head to the end of my existing where clause and stick in another AND operator. And then on the next line, I want to check where the film release date field is between two new parameters. So again, I'm going to copy and paste the film release date field and then write out between, and then create a new parameter called @StartDate and @EndDate. So the end result should look like so. I've just realized I've used the wrong case. Not that it matters at all, but just for consistency, I'll use an uppercase AND operator for the previous criteria as well. Okay, so having done that, we can click OK. And that will generate two new parameters. I'd just like to rearrange these so it's a little more readable. I'm going to insert a new row at the bottom of my parameters grid, and then, annoyingly, move my min runtime and max runtime back up, and then start date and end date to sit just below those two. Without changing anything about those parameters, it will work as it stands. If I run the report, I can enter some text which represents a date. So I can go for, say, 1 Jan 2000. And then for the end date, I can say, for example, 31 Dec 2010. And then when I press enter or click View Report, the results will be returned according to the values I've entered here. Now let's add some default values to these parameters. If we head back to the design view, I'll start with the start date parameter. We can double click on that. I'll change the data type again to match the data type of the field we're using it against. So I'm going to go with DateTime. One big advantage of choosing a DateTime data type for a parameter is that it displays the calendar DateTime picker. So we don't have to type our dates in if we pick the correct type. I can then head to the default values and choose to specify values, add a default value, and I'll type in what I just typed in there. I'll type in 1 Jan 2000. I can then click OK. I can then do the same thing for the end date parameter. So I can change its data type to DateTime, head to default values, specify a value, add a new one, and I'll fill this one in with 31 Dec. Let's limit the range. I'll go for 2000 again. Once I've done that, I can click OK. You might notice that as I clicked the OK button there on each of these default values, that the formatting of the date changed. If I head back to the end date, I typed in 31 Dec 2000, but that's been updated to match the correct date format for the regional settings of the computer I'm working on. So that's UK English, so it's day, month, year, rather than month, day, year, just in case you're watching in the States. So if I click OK and then run the report, I'll find those two values have been filled in and my dataset has been filtered accordingly. We could also calculate the min and max values of the release date field by using the same approach we took for the min and max runtime. Heading back to the design view, we can head back to our min max values query. I'm going to right click on it and choose Dataset Properties. I know that I'll need to edit at least some part of this in the underlying SQL code, so what I might as well do here is just copy the two lines for the max and the min runtime minutes. I can then provide myself with a new line and start with a comma before pasting in the max and the min functions again. What I'm then going to do is modify the reference to the runtime minutes column to the release date column, and I'll do that in both expressions. And then I can also update my column aliases to max release date and min release date. Copy and paste would have been a better idea. Let's try that again. All right, nearly there. So having done all that, we've got two new columns, a max and a min release date. And when we click OK, we can then use those two new values to populate the start date and end date default values. So let's head back to start date and default values, get values from a query, choose min max values, and then the min release date for the start date. And the same thing, but using max release date for the end date. Having done that, when I've clicked OK, I can run the report and you'll see how far out of date my movies database is becoming. The last film entered in December 2016. We can also do some interesting things by calculating the default values for start date and end date using expressions. Let's begin by calculating the min and max possible values for the data type of the release date column. If we head back to the mappings page that we looked at earlier on, the data type of the release date column in the database is DateTime. So the SQL Server data type is DateTime, and we can see that the corresponding .NET data type is also called DateTime. So let's head back to the design view, and then I'll go to the start date parameter first, head to the default values page, choose to specify values, click the add button, and then click FX. I'll type in equals datetime.min value. Then I'm just going to copy that to the clipboard as well while I'm here. Click OK once and again, and then head to the end date parameter, default values, specify values, click add, click the FX button, and then paste in the expression we've just copied, but change the property to max value instead. Okay, having done that, we can click OK and OK again. And when we run the report, unfortunately, we return an error. You can see in the background it has actually filled in our default start date and end date. So the calculation to pick the min and max has worked. It goes all the way back to the first year one, and then the end date is 31st of December 1999. The problem with that, although we've picked the correctly mapped data type, unfortunately, the range of values allowed with the DateTime data types in SQL Server and .NET are different. So if I expand the details of the error message that's appeared and just zoom in so you can see, it says that the SQL Server DateTime value must be between the 1st of the 1st 1753 and December 31st 1999. And it seems like a bit of an arbitrary date to pick, doesn't it, 1753, but there is a good historical reason for it. If you're interested, maybe have a quick read about the calendar riots. 1752 was a big year in calendars. Well, I suppose every year is, isn't it? But that was when Great Britain changed from the Julian calendar system to the Gregorian calendar system. So there's quite a big difference in the way months and days were organised then. Anyway, that's besides the point. If we head back to the report, obviously this one isn't going to work. Let's look at calculating some more sensible dates instead. I think what we should do is calculate the end date as today's date, and then maybe set the start date to be a certain period of time before today's date. Let's click OK on the error message and then head back to the design view and look at how we can calculate some more sensible values for those dates. The easier of the two values to calculate is today's date, so I want to set the end date parameter to be equal to today's date. Let's double click on the end date parameter, head to default values, and then click the FX button, and then we'll just remove the expression apart from the equal sign. We can then go to the common functions category and then find the date and time section. Inside there, if we scroll down a little bit, we'll find a function called today. If I double click on that, I'll also need to close a set of parentheses or the round brackets. The today function has no arguments to provide, but it still must include the open and the close round brackets. If I then click OK, that will generate today's date. For the start date, I want to work out a period of time that, just because of the range of dates in my database, I'm going to calculate the date that is 5 years ago from today's date. So that will calculate the 6th of February 2016. Ordinarily, if you have more recent data, of course, you can do this to calculate the previous week's worth of data or the previous month or quarter, etc. Anyway, the principle is still the same. If I double click the start date parameter and head to default values, click the FX button, and then remove the expression apart from the equals operator. I'm then going to go to the common functions category, date and time, and find the date add function. You'll see some examples in the bottom right hand corner of the dialog box trying to show you how the date add function works. The idea is that we specify an interval of times, that could be days, weeks, months, etc. The number of those intervals you want to either add or subtract, and then the date from which or to which you want to add or subtract them. What I'm going to do is say, if I double click the date add function, my date interval is going to be years. So I'm going to type in date interval dot year, followed by a comma. I want to subtract 5, followed by another comma, and then I want to subtract 5 years from today's date. So I'm going to head back down to find the today function and double click on that, close one set of parentheses for today, and then another set of parentheses for the date add function. Again, we have videos earlier in this playlist which explain how to create date and time expressions, so if you want a bit more information about how that works, have a hunt through those expressions videos. Once I've done that, if I click OK and then OK again, I can run the report one more time, and now we'll find that the date range is set between today and 5 years ago from today. So there we go, a variety of techniques for setting the default values of parameters in Report Builder. Hopefully that will save you some time for you and your users. I hope you found it useful. Thanks for watching. See you next time.